It's the 28th of August, 1815. James Riley and his shipmates are aboard the merchant vessel, the Commerce of Hartford, sailing in the vicinity between the Canary Islands and the western African coastline. The night is shrouded in fog, limiting visibility. A sudden, deafening collision throws the crew off their feet as the ship violently runs aground. The vessel is being forced onto a jagged, rocky coast, demanding swift action from the crew. They hastily load a longboat with essential supplies, barrels containing water and wine, some provisions, and a quantity of Spanish coins. Abandoning the stricken ship, the small longboat is quickly overwhelmed, and the crew is dragged underwater by the strong currents. Both crew and the longboat are eventually washed ashore. While some supplies scatter along the beach, much is lost, leaving Riley in despair. This voyage represented his last opportunity to salvage his financial standing, which had been ruined by the British blockade of the Connecticut River, a fate shared by many other captains. Displaying leadership, James Riley gathered his men, and together they utilized the longboat to recover as much as possible from the wreckage. Establishing a camp on the shore, they remained vigilant, anticipating potential attacks from the local inhabitants. At that time, the western Sahara was widely believed to be inhabited by savage cannibals. These fears proved to have some basis in reality. A lone, semi-nomadic fisherman appeared, stealing some of their possessions. Soon after, a larger group arrived, brandishing scimitars and spears. The crew retreated to the deck in fear, while Riley was captured by the natives. Two men restrained James, forcing him to call for assistance. His companion, Antonio Michel, approached the shore and was immediately attacked. In a desperate attempt to save Antonio's life, Riley attempted to convey to the natives that there was buried coin on the shore. Much to his relief, Antonio was then ordered to dig it up. While Antonio was occupied, Riley seized an opportunity. He leapt up and sprinted towards the sea, not daring to look back. He plunged into the surf and began to swim. After a time, he cautiously glanced back and saw one of the natives closing in, attempting to stab him with a spear. James swam with all his might. He reached the wreck and was pulled to safety by his crew. Enraged, the natives destroyed all the supplies on the shore, smashing the barrels. Riley and his crew were forced to witness the tragic demise of Antonio Michel. With the shore no longer an option, the men salvaged what they could from the wreck, loaded their small longboat, and ventured back into the sea. The surf was incredibly turbulent near the coast, and their chances of survival seemed slim. In desperation, James stood up, looked heavenward, and prayed, "Great protector and preserver of the universe, we beseech thee to spare our lives." Miraculously, at that very moment, the wind subsided, and a calm passage appeared in the surf, approximately 20 meters wide. The men navigated through it and out to sea. They remained at sea for 9 days, desperately searching the horizon for any sign of ships, gradually succumbing to exhaustion, hunger, and severe dehydration. Ultimately, acknowledging defeat, the men returned to the African coast. Upon reaching the shore, their ordeal continued. They walked barefoot along the rocky coastline for days, seeking a way inland past the towering cliffs. Finally, succeeding in moving beyond the cliffs, they were disheartened by the lack of food and water. However, their spirits were lifted when they spotted camel tracks in the sand. Riley devised a daring plan. He suggested to the crew that they attempt to locate the local inhabitants and sell themselves into slavery. He reasoned that, if they could survive as slaves, there might be a chance of eventually returning home. Following the tracks, they encountered a camp. The natives, upon seeing the Americans, were eager to enslave them. However, the process proved to be complicated. Several of the natives argued and fought over the division of the slaves, with some of the men being deemed more valuable than others. Eventually, an agreement was reached, and the American crew was divided into several groups to be taken away by their new masters. As they departed in different directions, some of Riley's crew were never seen again. Riley's group faced a journey marked by suffering and hardship. The native slaves made only brief stops to feed their camels, leaving Riley and his crew constantly starving and dehydrated. They endured terrible mistreatment, and their skin, already damaged by the tropical heat, was further burned by the harsh Sahara sun. During this time, Riley experienced vivid dreams. In one, he found himself in the elegant house of an Englishman who told him, "Take courage, my dear friend. God has decreed that you shall again embrace your beloved wife and children." Days passed, and as hope dwindled, some newcomers arrived at the camp. Two brothers, Sidi and Seti Hamet, were looking to trade with Riley's master. Riley, naturally skilled with languages, had by this point acquired some basic phrases from the locals and realized he could communicate. Approaching Sidi, Riley pleaded with him to purchase him and his remaining men, then resell them at the nearest major town, Mogador, now known as Essaouira, in Morocco. He promised that he had a friend there who would pay generously for him and his men, because they were American citizens. Sidi Hamet was touched by Riley's determination to save his men, but he threatened Riley with death if his promise proved false and compelled Riley to write a note to his supposed friend. Riley was exaggerating, of course, but with no other option, he wrote a letter to the town's consul, a complete stranger. A deal was made, and Riley and his men became the property of the Hamet brothers. The journey to civilization was arduous, yet, remarkably, the men arrived in reasonably good health. Hamet took Riley's note and went into town to deliver the letter to the non-existent friend. The fate of the crew now rested on chance. Would the note reach someone who would help them, or would they be killed for their deception? The note was delivered, and by an incredible stroke of luck, the recipient was the British consul, William Wilshire. He was astonished to learn about the American slaves in the Sahara and immediately agreed to pay for their freedom. Upon meeting Wilshire, Riley was stunned, as Wilshire was the man from his dream. After recovering at Wilshire's home, several of the men returned to America. Riley remained for a while as Wilshire's guest, and they formed a strong friendship. Seti Hamet pledged to Riley that he would attempt to locate more of the missing Americans, and he succeeded in finding 2 more crew members before he himself disappeared. Many of the crew were lost, never to be found. After returning to America, Riley wrote his memoirs in a book titled Sufferings in Africa. His book became one of Abraham Lincoln's favorites, and his story as a mistreated slave helped Lincoln shape his political ideology. Riley named a son William Wilshire Riley and founded a village in Ohio, naming it Wilshire in honor of his savior and great friend.